Before we started recording this episode, Carrie and I were like dying laughing because I think some people on the internet maybe think that we are the same person at times, which I don't know how she feels about that, but I feel extremely flattered to the point where I've even had people send in notes and they're like, CMJ, I love your work. You've done such amazing content. And I'm like, I don't think that they know that we're not the same person. So even though we have been on similar hair journeys, I'm super excited to prove to the world that Brie Lever and Carrie Melissa Jones are two separate people, but here on the same podcast episode to talk about community drama. So please enjoy. It is filled to the brim with great insights and strategy and years of hard-earned wisdom from Carrie. So enjoy. Welcome to Dear Brie, an advice column for community conundrums, fiascos, and drama. This season of Dear Brie is sponsored by our friends over at Heartbeat. Heartbeat is an all-in-one community platform, and it's the one I chose to host my own community. Your members can finally have events, conversation, content, and even courses in one distraction-free, intimate, customized home. I chose Heartbeat for 3 reasons. First, Heartbeat is unparalleled in their events management features. Events are a core part of my community architecture, and their features make my life so much easier. Second is segmentation. It's super easy to break my community into smaller, more niche subgroups and create a more customized experience for that group in Heartbeat. And finally, their courses. Being able to host my educational materials and learning journey in a community-first platform makes my community that much more valuable and retention that much stickier. I'm an affiliate with Heartbeat, which means when you sign up through my link in the show notes, I get paid a small amount at no extra charge to you. Thank you for supporting my work in that way. And finally, I usually record this podcast from Hawaii Island, so a special thank you to the Kanaka Maoli people on whose land I currently reside. Our letter today deals with a sensitive subject between 2 members and whether to take a proactive approach or not try to control the situation. So to help share some insights on today's dilemma, which could be a potential drama, I've invited Carrie Melissa Jones to join us. Carrie, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
A little bit about Carrie. She is an award-winning community builder, author, social scientist. Ooh, I love that. And consultant who has worked with large enterprises, foundations, nonprofits, and leading brands like Discord, Nike, Google, Microsoft, and Airbnb. She's the CEO of the CMJ Group, founding partner of CMX, and co-author of Building Brand Communities with Charles Vogel. So Carrie, I could not think of a better person to help us dissect this conundrum today. And thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity.
Carrie, as you know, this is a podcast about community conundrums, fiascos, drama. Do you have any tea from your own experience that you'd be willing to share with us to get us started?
Oh my goodness. If there's one thing that's true about community building is that there will always be some kind of conflict. We'll call it conflict. And that's not a bad thing. Conflict can be very generative and clarifying for us. So yeah, the example I wanted to talk through today is actually one that's around a professional community that I'm part of. It's a loosely organized group of folks who are really professionally focused on consulting and strategy. And what happened was a few months ago, a friend of mine reached out to me and said, "Hey, we're going to do a dinner in person. I'd like you to come." And I said, "Oh, that sounds amazing. Who's going to be there and what will the purpose of the dinner be?" And my friend told me, "Oh, it's actually being hosted at a very good friend of mine's house. But the person organizing and convening is someone who I've had multiple interactions with, and they're rubbing me the wrong way. And they've stolen some of my intellectual property before." And I was like, "Friend, I love you. Do you want me to go to the dinner to morally support you? Because I don't want to have dinner with this person." And she said, "No, your moral support. I'll be fine. I can handle it. And if that's the only reason why you'd be coming, then don't worry about it." And I said, "Okay, I'm not going to go." And meanwhile, a few weeks went by, and then my friend who was hosting it at his home calls me the next day and says, I cannot believe this happened. This person invited people over to my home and I welcomed them in. I was happy to do that. And then we were eating our meal and having a great conversation. And then we get to dessert, and this person decides to tell the rest of us that the meal that he brought into my home, because he didn't cook for folks, it was catered. The meal was sponsored by a corporate sponsor in my home. And he didn't tell me this, nor did he tell anybody else who was attending this. And I feel really weird. And should I feel weird about this? I don't know if I should or not. And so, yes, you absolutely should. That is very strange for someone not to disclose a corporate sponsor for an event in your home that they're not paying you for or anything else. And then it turned out that the two of them talked, and there was conflict there where the person who brought in the corporate sponsor was like, I see what you're saying, but I'm right and you're wrong in this scenario. And so there was a complete lack of reconciliation there. And then there was conversation among my other mutual friends. And so the person who had originally invited me, who said that she felt weird about this person, said, hey, I'm getting messages now about this. The whole thing blew up. Okay. Somehow I wasn't even there, but I'm getting brought into all of this. And this happens in communities all the time, that people do things, you can't always control them. And then I'm not even the community leader in this scenario, but if it were a community that I was leading, then it gets back to me. And then I have to deal with this and reconcile the situation. So yeah, a lot of lessons in that.
Well, and especially in the community spaces, I feel like everyone's so connected and a little too connected sometimes. So things like this can spread like wildfire. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious, what do you feel is the seed behind this? Do you feel like it's a communication breakdown? Do you think it's ill intent? Do you think, and maybe this ranges in lots of different scenarios. For this scenario, what could you break it down that you feel like happened in this scenario?
Yeah, I would say primarily it was a communication issue. I don't think there's anything wrong with hosting a sponsored dinner. I don't think there's anything wrong with bringing people together and disclosing that is the case. I think it's a problem when we're not transparent. So we have to be proactive and transparent about who is paying for things, who's involved in our organizing efforts, because there can be all kinds of motivations that our members aren't even aware of, and we could be taking advantage of and exploiting them. And in this case, when I talked with my friend and he was asking me, should I be upset about this? My thought was, yes, this is your home. And in your case, you really view your home as a kind of sacred space. And he violated that sacred space for you. It's a temple that you have, to use the language of Charles Vogel, it's a temple for your community that then was exploited without your permission for capitalism's gains. That's wrong. That's really wrong. So if this person had simply just said, by the way, this meal will be sponsored, is that okay with you? And then included that in the invitation, then you're inviting people to a different kind of gathering. But we need to know that beforehand. The other big communication issue was just simply in the way that the invitations happened. So like I said, my friend invited me with this big caveat of, we don't really know why we're gathering, we're just gathering. And this person has not always behaved the best. So the invitation wasn't a powerful invitation. And when we're inviting people together, that invitation should be clear, deliberate, and purposeful, and in line with our values. The other thing is, on the other side of that, if you get a feeling about someone that their integrity is not quite what you would hope it would be, that your values are not aligned, honor that feeling. Honor that feeling. I know a lot of community builders, speaking from very personal experience, tend to be people pleasers. And because of that, again, from my very personal experience here, setting a simple boundary can feel like I'm an awful person. Like saying no to this invitation, like I am the jerk here. But actually, our intuition is telling us something about that person and their motivations and their lack of alignment with us. Not always. We definitely want to check those assumptions. But how we spend our time and how we spend our energy is of course, how we spend our lives. And so we should honor if we're getting a message from our bodies or our minds that we should make a different choice.
Yeah, I'm taking a couple takeaways from what you shared. I think clear is kind, full transparency, full disclosure, like when in doubt, err on the side of sharing too much.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to sponsorship. I love it when I see even like consultants or communities just like really blatantly state, this is how we make money. We make a portion of money from our membership. We make a portion of money from sponsorships. And even the more specific that they get, there's so much trust immediately built where I'm like, oh, thank you for not hiding that and being weird about it. For coming out and saying it. It creates trust and it creates a bridge for me. So clear is kind, keep the kindness going and keep it clear. And the second thing, I love the permission that you gave for, I think I certainly come from a culture where benefit of the doubt is given to our detriment sometimes. And I think especially in like a people pleasing, that you can condition yourself and your body to ignore some of those signs and ignore an intuition when it's okay to give yourself permission. If you feel uncomfortable or unsettled about a leader, an environment, it's okay to listen to that. You might not even fully have all the information to back your brain up with the data that you need to make a rational decision. And I'm hearing you say it's okay to make an intuitive decision.
Yeah. It's more than okay. Our body has all kinds of wisdom. Yeah.
Really good. Okay. Well, that's such a juicy start. Are you ready for the letter I've prepared for you?
Yes. Got some tea. Let's move it up to coffee.
Dear Bree, I just launched my new community for people who want to write their own memoirs. I've worked one-on-one with clients for some time, but this is the first time I'm bringing them together in a communal space. And I'm hosting the experience in Heartbeat. Woo-woo. Shout out to Heartbeat, our little sponsor, too. I have 2 members joining who I know have diametrically opposed beliefs in the community. One proudly has a transgender partner, and the other has a family member who is trans who they do not talk to because of how they identify. These beliefs are likely going to be a part of the stories they share, and the whole point of this community is for them to get support sharing their story. My question is this: is it wise to take a proactive approach here? Is there anything I can do to get ahead of any conflict between these two? Or should I just wait and see how it plays out? Am I overthinking this? Signed, Hesitant in Honolulu. Do you resonate with anything in this letter?
Yes. So this is very common that we'll invite people into our community and we'll already know if there's going to be potential conflict. This is also a very emotional topic, a very personal topic, but it happens from a business perspective too. I've had clients join our community, the CMJ community, and they'll be at competing companies. And so we know there's going to be a conflict there. So how do we work around that? So yeah, yes, this needs to be dealt with proactively. It's the short answer.
Ooh, I'm actually really curious about that one because that leads us into like community. I think community and competition are about 1.5 degrees separated from each other. And so I'm sure it crosses over consistently. So I want to ask you more questions about that. But before we dig into that, what insights do you have to share with our friend Hesitant in Honolulu about how they could proactively approach the situation?
So I think number one, before you take any action, there is some reflection that needs to happen for you as the community leader. And that reflection needs to revolve around what are my values and what are the values of this community. So that needs to be made extremely explicit. And if that's not explicit to you personally yet, then you need to work on that individually. And then you also need to publicly state what your values are. And usually the way I recommend doing that is wrapping them into some really simple guidelines. So if your values, in our case, for example, our company values are equity, compassionate candor, equanimity or balance, and relationality. And so these values underscore every action that we ever take as community builders. So, for example, equity. This is about access for folks, regardless of financial background, regardless of identity, regardless of different neurodivergent identities. And so we have to think about, okay, what are the ways in which we present our community and what are the pricing models and all of that. So in this case, some of the values that you might consider are things like, you might even consider equity as one of them, or fairness, or I don't know, love or support, or there's many values that might be important to you. Get that list down to 3 to 4, and then you can start to use it to make decisions. Because what is going to need to happen then proactively, once those values are in place, is you're going to have to decide who is welcome here and who is not, because one person's belief system is better or worse than the other, but because potentially when they each share their stories in this community, they might not be able to be positive towards one another.
Yeah, and stay in alignment with the values that you've
exactly
said. This is how we agree to move through this space together, and even to move through conflict together. There will be conflict. Your values should encapsulate how you support your members through that conflict as well.
Exactly. Yeah. So if a conflict were to then, and when it does come up in this case, then you can say, someone shares a story and someone else says, I can't believe you've said this in this story, and I personally disagree with it. You can say, hey, remember in our guidelines what our values are. And they're about, one way that I've seen this phrased a lot is challenge the ideas and not the person necessarily in the community. And if someone is unable to do, that's when you might say, hey, I don't think this community is a fit for you. So you need to be ready to, if these folks can't have generative conflict or even just give each other tolerance and ignore one another, that you might need to ask one to leave or ask both to leave the community. So think about that now and decide what those values are, what your guidelines will be, and then you could even start writing out templates for what to do when the violations of those guidelines occur. That's what I recommend doing. And this is the kind of stuff where I think ChatGPT and other Claude and these other AI models, they can produce some pretty good and diplomatic guideline violation content copy for you. That's the kind of stuff I do not like writing. I don't know any community manager that loves being like, you violated our guidelines, blah, blah, blah. You can feed it your guidelines, feed it your voice and tone and your values, and then have it spit out a response for you. And then you can edit it and make it more human and what you would actually say. Yeah.
And then your edit prompt is now make it sound warm and nice.
Exactly. You just keep warmer, make it warmer.
So good. Do you ever also share upfront circumstances under which someone can expect that they won't be a part of the community anymore? Do you recommend making that available to members, or do you just handle that on a case-by-case basis?
So if you're just at a large scale, I think it's important for that to be transparent. You say what happens when you violate once, twice, 3 times. At a small scale for a small community, I think all you need to do are share the guidelines. And then if and when a violation occurs, then you talk to them one-on-one, either simply through a DM or a chat, or better yet, get on the phone with them or get on a Zoom or video call and talk to them about what happened. And then you can make a decision from there. And all you have to write in the guidelines is exactly what you just said, which is repercussions or whatever ChatGPT tells you to write will be dealt with on a case-by-case basis. And we reserve the right to make a decision individually.
I love that. That reminds me, my dad has this saying that he passed on to me: avoid making a policy where what's needed is a hard conversation. And so it sounds like what you're saying is, unless you have a huge scaled community where you just need a system in place, don't avoid having a hard conversation about the spirit of your community and the values that you want embodied there.
Yeah.
And just take the lazy route of you will be thrown out with X, Y, and Z rules, or making a really nitpicky list of things that people could get in trouble for.
Yes. Yeah. Because giant corporations do that and people hate it.
I really love to, something else I want to call out and that I've seen work really well in communities is so identifying your values, really getting clear on what they look like in the community. And I love seeing like a mantra evolve out of the value. And especially when it's a new community, like this might come from you, but it also might come from your community members. So you have said the mantra, challenge the ideas, not the person. Like that, I would say is like a mantra that might go with, let's say that the value there is like understanding or like giving good feedback. I think having a mantra that your community can come back to time and again that kind of sticks in their head, one, it creates like this nice internal culture where like somebody from the outside coming in for the first time is like, oh, we use this phrase, like challenge the ideas a lot. I wonder what that's about. And it like starts to make them feel on the inside once they like get it and they start to see it in action. But it's also just a helpful reminder. Like it keeps the spirit of those values front and center. Whereas the word understanding might not be something that like, like our value of understanding, like might
it means nothing.
Might feel a little sterile, but I feel like the mantra draws this bridge into the behavior. And this is what that value looks like when we put it on.
Yeah. And I think that's exactly right, that it can organically come out of a community, that you don't have to have those written out, these pithy little phrases on day one. They will evolve over time. They will naturally come about and you'll find ways to incorporate them.
This podcast is sponsored by Ember Consulting, where I'm the founder and head community creator. At Ember, we help people who are familiar with running their business on content, coaching, or consulting become community powered. As you hear in this podcast, creating a community is really tough and managing it can be even harder. So don't do it alone. Whether you're looking to launch a new community or pivot your strategy, our one-on-one consulting helps you skip the learning curve and do it right the first time. And when you're ready to belong to a space just for community creators learning, testing, and growing their communities together, check out the Ember community. Now, back to the episode. So on that point, how do you decide when it's time to like reassess values and like they need their next evolution? Is this like an annual assessment? Is it like once shit hits the fan? What's the prompting? Do you do that proactively, reactively? How have you approached it?
In an ideal world, you would do it proactively you would at least check in every 6 months, but that's not how the world works. And I'm well aware of that. And especially in large organizations, it's usually prompted by some shit hitting the fan somewhere that you have to revisit it. And for myself, I'm a small business owner. It's prompted by me just feeling, hey, things feel stale here. Something's not working. And that typically, what I've noticed, I've been in business for over a decade, is that happens for me about every like 18 months to like year to 18 months or so. And so it just naturally occurs. And there'll be some seasons where it's every quarter, actually. And I'm in one of those seasons right now where I'm learning so much that every quarter I'm updating, not our values, but the ways that our values are manifesting. So yeah, I think, again, in an ideal world, you would set aside time to revisit that on a regular basis, and your values probably won't change too much. But how they impact your community's design, the kind of experiences that you decide to host in the community, the frequency of gatherings, the frequency of postings, all that stuff, that will change on a regular basis. And it should evolve to keep things exciting and interesting and glowed up on a regular basis.
Yeah, I love that. I do think there's a school of thought that's like, your values should never change. Like they are your like ultimate North Star that you never deviate. And I understand the spirit of that philosophy, but I think sometimes when you start out, especially in a community, it's like you're on a voyage and you're not quite sure where land is.
Yeah. Yes.
And so like you might be pointed in this direction, but you might find out like, actually, we want to head south to warmer weather. And so we need to introduce a new value that's going to help point us in that direction. So taking the time to assess like, this is where we thought we wanted to go. Is that actually where we want to go? And leaving some flexibility for yourself. And I think it's a really healthy thing for your community to see you flex and evolve like that, because it keeps your members expectant and hopeful for even better scenarios and environments in your community then exactly what you said, which is where it can just grow really stale and ultimately not be a space that's creating a thriving, vibrant community. So I love that point. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, when people stop making progress in a community, that is when engagement stalls. And similarly with you as a leader, if you as a leader stop making progress with the community, then interest often wanes, progress stalls, engagement drops. So yeah, that's why it's so important to regularly check in. And your team might also evolve. And as your team evolves, I recommend bringing the team in to change the values with you. We did a huge restructuring of our team values right before I went on maternity leave. And they completely changed. The only one that stayed from years past is equity. Everything else has been completely overhauled.
I love that. I want to go back to a trailhead that you mentioned really briefly in the beginning, which was that like community competition, fine line, but then having members in your community who are truly each other's competition. How did you navigate that?
I really want to hear your thoughts on community and competition and this 1.5 degree separation there. I don't know if you want to share a little bit about that before I share.
It's philosophical. It's basically just that often the people who we perceive we are in competition with are probably the people we need to be in community with.
Oh, yeah.
So it's really easy. We would be a great example. We probably serve a very similar community builder. And I have a lot of other people like in that same boat, consultants, coaches. And those are some of the people who I've learned the most from through different like masterminds, following along their content. For my own mental sanity, I have to be really careful for myself. I like to think of it like when you're community/competition and you're in like swim lanes next to each other, I have to be careful that I'm keeping my eyes on my lane and only keeping people in my periphery.
Yeah,
but I've gone through different, it is hard. Yeah. And that's a mindset and like mental battle that I have to protect myself from.
Yeah.
But I've gone through different seasons of really getting so much support and value from those connections and being in community with people who like could very easily be perceived as my competition. So I don't know. That's just like my take on it. It fluxes in different seasons, but I've generally found that leaning into and embracing your competition as community will probably leave us all more better off in the end.
Yeah, that resonates with my own experience. So that's similar to the way that I view when clients come in and their companies might be in competition with one another. It's typically the companies that are in competition with one another, not the individuals. And so I love what you said about that these folks are the ones who you could be learning from and that you can be leaning on. And I think that's completely true. And there are certain things that are probably under NDA that you cannot and should not share in a community space. And so what I have done in the past, and this has happened a couple of different times in the CMJ community, is, well, I'm very clear. I'll DM people. I'll actually tell them like, hey, just so you know, somebody from a similar kind of company is here. I actually think you two should meet, but regardless of whether you meet or not, I just want you to be aware of that. If you see them on calls or anything like that, just be aware that anything you share here, like we do record our calls and things like that. So I want you to be armed with that information. They can then decide what to do with that. If that means that they can't find value in the community and they need to step away, then so be it. That's really unfortunate, but it might be the case. There are other ways to work with myself, and there are other communities that they can be part of. That's why enabling what Charles and I call campfire experiences is so important in communities. So what those are, you have the community at large and community open events to the entire community, or if you're a creator, like your entire audience even. And then you have campfire experiences, which are typically much, much smaller. And they include the space, time, proximity, and permission to share so that everybody in that small space can share. And that's how we create that sense of coziness, even in small communities. Even in large communities. So we need to enable that in spaces where those two competitors might then not be in those campfire experiences together. Again, that's not to say that they can't learn so much from one another, but at least my priority when stewarding a community for them is their safety and the safety of their careers and their well-being and things like that. So that's how I've dealt with that in the past.
Yeah, I can totally see that. The concept of competition can look so different depending on, is this a salaried employee? Is this a consultant? So I can totally see really needing to pay attention to the nuance of those dynamics. And the big takeaway that I have from what you said is like coming back to our like clear is kind and keep it clear. Like that is like getting ahead of it, being really transparent with your members. And I could even hear in that language that you used in that direct message to that member, like maybe some space to pull in our values of maybe one of the mantras in your community, if competition pops up a lot, is community over competition. Hey, we had somebody join your community who like is pretty tangential and could be perceived as competition. Here are some of the ways you can approach it. Ultimately, I believe this is a huge benefit to you, and here's why. And it comes back to this community over competition. I think you have a lot to learn from each other. And I understand it might be like uncomfortable and just not the right space for you. So if you need to leave, I understand that. So, I love that.
Yeah. And I've never seen anybody actually leave, by the way, when I've shared that. In fact, they tend to lean in more because they do realize this is a space where they really could learn something. Yeah.
I wish I had that mindset back when I was leading my first community that I built. I totally had that like competition mindset, like other communities and like companies that had similar communities that were doing like a similar thing to me. I felt like totally this posture of like competition with them. Like I didn't want to be too close to them. And I'm like, that was just so short-sighted of me. I saw my identity first and foremost as like an employee of that organization. But if I saw my identity more as a community builder, I think, and like more broadly, a high level vision of what is this work for and how is it serving my career, I think I would have had a much broader posture towards getting more connected to people who I perceived as my competition. So maybe just a little word to the salaried employees. What's your primary identity? And how are you like visualizing this competition? Is it through your identity as a salaried employee? Or is it in this identity of like the greater purpose of your work? And what would serve the greater purpose of your work?
Yeah, that's brilliant. And you also never know what could happen. I remember back when I was building community at a tech company called Chegg, I would reach out to it was an ed tech company. I'd reach out to every other education community manager I could possibly find. And this was years ago. There weren't a ton of folks, but I would be like, let's just get on the phone. Some people completely ignored me. Other people were really excited. We ended up acquiring one of the companies of the people that I reached out to. And so I already knew her, like knew the community manager who got acquired. So you just have no idea what can happen, no idea at all. And so it's better to be networked, much, much better to be networked than to be isolated.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so this brings me back to our letter, actually. Do you recommend, so we have the values. Let's assume that our hesitant in Honolulu has their values aligned. They are transparent to the community. They've got the behavior that follows how they are manifested. Should they have a proactive, like reaching out in the DMs? I mean, hey, just so you know, we have some members here who have pretty opposing beliefs to you. Like, what's the next step there?
Yeah. Well, this person has said that they've worked one-on-one with these folks before. And given that's the case, I do think it would be good to reach out to them one-on-one. It could serve multiple purposes. One, just a quick check-in with your former client. Two, let them know that your community is launching. And three, let them know this is a space where I'm not here to control what people write about. I'm here to help them write whatever they need to write. And so there may be content that I struggle with. I'm hesitant to use the term trigger warning or content warning on things like that. But yeah, you just, that's what I would recommend since these are one-on-one clients. And that's why this will depend though. If you don't know them at all, then I would say there's no need for that proactive conversation. Let it happen, but you have a proactive policy in place. But otherwise, and this is coming from someone whose value is relationality, that relationship is more important even than the success of your community offering. So invest in that relationship, spend the time on that relationship, make sure that both of those people feel safe and let them make the decision. If being exposed to that kind of content might hurt them or harm them in some way and they don't want even the possibility of it, then let them make that decision. But I have a feeling that that would not be the case if that relationship is strong.
Yeah, it feels really values aligned for me as I hear you like saying that. And even it's messy language and it's messy to figure out like the way to frame it, and that you want to like honor the relationship and the connection and you want them to have a great experience in your community. And so I can hear just the messiness of grappling with that. And to me, it like feels very values aligned with like my value for this podcast, which is like bravery and like calling upon the courage that we need to like have those hard, messy conversations and even to have them proactively. And that's really, I think, what makes community building really tough for a lot of people, but it's also what makes it so rewarding in the end. And I resonate with that for what I'm embracing as messy conversations in this podcast. Quite frankly, I'm like, ooh, I know what that feeling is like in my body.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Really good. Well, Carrie, this is super helpful. Do you have any parting words of wisdom or insight for our listeners, and especially hesitant in Honolulu?
Yeah. When I think about the work of community building, I think it often we get lost and start thinking about how it's going to help our business, or how it's going to help us make more money, or help our organization make more money, or save money. And it's really easy to get caught in that. And then it's really easy to also look at what other people are doing and say, well, they launched a community and they made $600,000 from this. And why am I only making $2,000 from this or less? It's so easy to get lost in that. So easy. But if we look at the larger kind of landscape of what the world needs today, it's about connection, relationship. It's about trust. We're in a crisis of trust around the globe. And that is work that is always worth doing. So no matter what you're building community around, if it's about those things, then it is worth doing. And it has enormous ripple effects, even if you never ever see them in the world. And one thing that Charles Vogel, again, one of my mentors and the co-author of my book, has said to me, it's not your place to know about all the impacts that your work has in the world, because likely it's going to expand beyond your lifetime even. And so we can't grasp it, and it's our job and our opportunity to just let go and surrender to it. And so I just want to encourage hesitant in Honolulu that the work that they're doing is very important and that they can hold this space, and it is very much worth doing every day.
Mm-hmm. What a good word to end us off and send us off on. Thank you. Thanks, Carrie. I think I needed that. I like just received that in my heart. That was really sweet. I just hope every community manager embraces that with the tenderness with which I just felt it. So thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, Carrie, thank you so much for just the good work that you're doing in the community building space and have been doing for so long. We have so much to still learn from you. How can our listeners find you or support your work?
I'm at Carrie Melissa Jones on all the social media platforms, except I'm not on Snapchat these days, but Threads, all LinkedIn, all of them. You can find me at Carrie Melissa Jones.
Wonderful. Oh, I hate Snapchat. I'm so glad that you didn't say Snapchat.
I couldn't.
No more. All right. Thanks, everyone. And we'll see you in the next episode.
Bye.
Thank you so much for sharing some space with me on this episode. Please like and review wherever you find your podcasts. To submit your own community conundrum, fiasco, or other drama, go to the link in the show notes. Aloha and catch you next time.